It's 10 o'clock, so yeah, so happy you guys could make it. Everybody's here. It looks like we got a decent sized turnout today. Um, and today, yeah, here, let me go to the next slide. So today's meeting, as we kind of go through it, right, it's focused as a workshop, not just kind of a webinar to give you information, but also we're hoping to be able to have more conversation back and forth. So the purpose of the meeting, right, is to connect the communities across Deschutes County, whether you're already Firewise or in the process or thinking about becoming Firewise. All of our discussion is going to be focused around that. So today, specifically, we're going to be talking about project planning. So our last workshop was focused around outreach strategies, where we talked about how people are sending out their newsletters and conversing and kind of getting that packaged up. And our very first one was just overall Firewise process and how that works. But today we'll be looking at project planning. So hopefully, in the end, we'll be sharing some of those lessons learned and sharing kind of the types of projects that we've done. Now, the outcome of that purpose, right, is exactly that. You can't have one without the other, right? So we're hoping to have the extended network to support one another. So not only can you ask me questions, but you'll also hopefully extend your network out, that you'll be able to talk to other communities about how they've done things. Because the reality is oftentimes when you ask me about something, I don't always have the answer. I'll make something up though, unfortunately. But yeah, if I don't have the answer, a lot of times I'm putting you in contact with somebody that's done this before, and hopefully we can help to kind of short circuit that, where we can start to be able to converse across the communities a little bit more. Today, when we go through this, we're going to kind of start off with a little bit of interactive polling. We're going to throw up a couple of questions here in a little bit, and we'll just to kind of set the stage of the types of projects and just kind of some miscellaneous stuff, so we get a little bit of a common ground that we all stand on. And then we've got some local speakers that are going to talk today about their projects, and then just kind of planning those projects out and talk about their pitfalls that they had, their successes, and kind of their lessons learned. And then we'll have grants. We'll talk about grants and kind of some tips for funding your projects. This year, I think we had, we had some money through the county here that Ed facilitated out, but if you didn't get one, or you did get one, or whatever the case may be, he'll have some tips for getting that together as well. And then the big piece of it that I feel like we're going to get a lot of use out of is that group breakout, where we actually break into groups, smaller groups, so we can be a little more comfortable with ourselves, right? We can come off mute, turn on our camera if we want. You don't have to, no pressure. But come off mute and actually talk and be able to ask those questions that we're wanting to ask that we're not able to ask with the whole group. And we can also talk about some of our lessons that we've had with our own communities. And then when we get done with that, we'll bring that back together, discuss kind of what we talked about in our breakout groups, and then we'll wrap up for the day. And then, like I mentioned earlier, as we wrap up for the day, we will have Ed and I will stay on, and whoever wants to stay on or has time to, or whatever, you can stay on the call, ask questions, and extend that discussion out as you want to. So I'm gonna, just a quick introduction. I'm not gonna go deeply involved with everybody here. I'll let them introduce themselves a little bit more as we go through the talk today. But I'm Boone Zimmerly, Fire Adaptive Communities Coordinator for Deschutes County. What that means is I've taken over the position of the Director of Project Wildfire, and I also organize, facilitate the fire-free side of things as well. You guys may be familiar with Allison Green, Jody Barham, who was in the position before me. I just took this beginning of the year. Prior to that, I worked at ODF for quite a few years, working with several of you guys, several of the communities around Central Oregon with fuels reduction classes, and grant administration. But we're going to hear today from Rod Bonaker, resident leader for Indian Ford Ranch. They're new to Firewise, so it'll be really fun to hear kind of how everything went for them as they organized one of their first projects this year. Marlena Weisbrot is here from Aperion Management Group. She's a community manager. And then if you're familiar with Aperion Management Group, they manage a lot of HOAs for folks around Central Oregon. So they kind of do that yearly, the yearly planning of projects, and I think we'll get more of that view of kind of like what they've ironed out over the years. So whether you're new to Firewise and planning your first project or further in the process, I think there's going to be some pieces and tips to pick up there. And then we'll come around to Ed Keith, our county forester, and then he's generally administering a lot of our grants that we have for funds that come down, and he's going to talk about tips for funding your grants, what makes a good grant project, and what he's looking at when he's processing the grants. So I think we'll start off with the poll questions, and these are the two questions that we'll have, but Ed will be popping those up, and they should pop up in front of your screen here. But what kind of projects have you had in the past? So we'll see that poll here in just a moment. Okay, and then the other question, what types of projects does your community want to plan in the future? And, so whatever, there's several questions there. So I think that as we do these, I think this is where we're going to find that we're going to have a lot of things in common between one another. Even I got the questions, so submitting it myself. And then as all those results come in, once it looks like Ed's got the results, we'll take a look at what they say here. Oh yeah, I'm looking at the some of the chat questions here, and I think everybody, if you've been on some of our past workshops, I've always promised that we would be sending out resources afterwards, and I usually get a follow-up email, but there are several resources that haven't come out yet, and I've been compiling those here on my computer, and I kind of went back and forth. What I decided was I would send all three out to all participants that have participated in all three of our workshops. And in doing that, I think it would give the opportunity, if you missed one, you can watch the video and then see all the resources that we discussed and what we had. So how are we doing on the poll, Ed?
So we've got about 59% of our folks have responded. That's better than a primary election, I guess, but we'll give it just a few more seconds for folks if you want to reply. And this is just to give us a feel, and the rest of the groups a feel for the types of projects that you're either doing or want to plan.
Yeah. Okay. So hopefully if you see that popping up, you're able to answer those questions for us, and then we'll consolidate them accordingly.
All right. Looks like folks that are going to respond have. I'm going to go ahead and share the results.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So, yeah, wow, there's a lot of people that have done a lot of the same ones. So 57% of the people of participants today have done the Firewise Day event. I would definitely say that's probably the top of it, right? When I think of that event, that's the one where you invite myself or someone from ODF or the local fire department out and do and have a talk about defensible space and the programs and stuff that are available out there. And then sweat equity, I know there's a lot of communities that do that roadside chipping, and that's and that's the kind of grant that Ed set up this last year, was the roadside chipping. And then ODF has some grants that I believe they can use funds towards that stuff, but you'd have to talk directly with them about that. And then the future stuff, yeah, the future stuff looks like it parallels. It looks like a few more people wanted to do a Firewise Day event, and those can be pretty good, right? It's kind of nice to be able to invite everybody out. That's myself or the fire department or ODF. So, with doing that, I'm hoping that people see that we're not really alone in this. We're all thinking a lot of the same kinds of events to be planning ahead for. and that a lot of those events that we plan ahead for are also events that we've done in the past. And being able to span that whole background across all the communities, I think we actually have a larger network of folks that do this than what we're aware of. So hopefully today will bring some awareness to that. Okay, and then today when we go to talk through, or we listen to the talks from the different communities, I think one of the things that we're going to be seeing is that, you know, this chart right here, this could be a whole day conversation about the planning process and what we do, but as it pertains to Firewise communities and the way that it works and kind of the talks that we're going to hear today, you're going to hear the background of this, whether people were knowingly following this kind of process or not. This is pretty much what's happening, right? Is we have the initiation of our projects. So we're seeing the need for the projects. We're tying that to the action plan that was developed through the Firewise. So if you remember right, when you do Firewise, you create the assessment and an action plan comes forward. So as you're creating the initiation in that action plan, we're beginning to transition into that option selection. So what is the project that we're going to be planning? Whether that's one of those Firewise day events or something different. And I don't know if everybody can hear the kids screaming in the background or not. Like running up and down the hallway behind me. So we begin to decide what we're doing, curbside chipping or one of those Firewise day event where we have guest speakers out. Then we begin to transition into the planning, the who, what, where, and how of what we're going to be doing. We begin to build our network of folks, or we're informing the network of folks, and we're getting all our participants together, whether that's volunteer work or contracting it out and looking at our costs, right? And then we're doing the implementation, getting that project done. You know, it's going out there and it's happening. Everybody's working hard, and you know, and unfortunately, a lot of times that whole planning cycle kind of gets short-circuited or short-cycled right there at implementation. Once it's done, everybody kind of like, you know, does the old and I know I'm prone to it, right? When I get something done, I'm usually feeling pretty good about it. Work presses on to the next piece, but the reality is we need to also be thinking about that evaluation. So that evaluation piece is kind of, well, what went well? What didn't go well? Through today's talk, I hope that's a piece that we're able to kind of draw out with this. I think there's going to be some good tips on what went well and what didn't go well, because I think that that can be a hang up for all of us, you know, whatever we're planning out there. And if we're aware of what those pitfalls are, we're able to plan around that and then be able to work a little bit more efficiently. So I'm hoping that that is where we're going. So the next kind of piece, you know, is going to be, and I hope that you're getting ready here, Rod, but we're going to transition into Rod's talk here. I've got Rod up for a few minutes to talk about his community. Rod's a resident leader up there in Indian Ford Ranch. They did a lot of good work. This was their first year, so it's kind of fun to see what happened with the first year. I think there's potential for a lot of good lessons learned out of it. When I talked to Rod the other day, I ran into him in person and asked how it went. He said, oh, there's a few things we do different. And I was like, that's perfect. That's what I'm looking for, hoping for. But Rod, are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me okay?
All right. Yep. And then just let me know. I've got the slides kind of set up as in the order that you saw the other day, and I'll flip through them for you.
Okay. Yeah, they're just pictures. I think we'll just, I'll just cue you up and we can move on.
Okay.
Well, thanks, Spoon, and everyone else for this opportunity. Just some real quick background. I represent the Firewise Committee for the Hill community at Indian Ford. It's one of a half a dozen separate Indian Ford communities north of Sisters. We have about 70 lots, nearly completely built out. I think there's 67 households in the subdivision. About a dozen of those are currently second homes, not occupied year-round, and probably another dozen are some form of Airbnb or VRBO, vacation rental. So a little over half of the subdivision are full-time residents. The lots on our subdivision vary from an acre to an acre and a half. We're one of the smaller lot subdivisions in Indian Ford, and also the original Indian Ford subdivision, and the oldest one of the group of a half a dozen. We occupy a pretty interesting piece of terrain. It's called the Hill because it's a ridge line that runs more or less north-south between in the bend of Camp Polk Road. And so most of the lots have pretty significant slope. From a fire risk standpoint, we not only have the fuel loading here, but we have some terrain issues that we don't have control over, but it sort of makes the fuel work that we do even more important. So May 22nd, 23rd, we took advantage of the fee waiver at the Deschutes transfer station, Northwest Transfer Station on Fryrear Road, to be able to dump stuff for free. We had 13 volunteers ultimately out of the community, representing 6 households. Not the greatest of turnouts, and we'll talk about that in a little bit some more. But we worked 2 days. We hauled over 40 trailer loads of slash from 26 of the households in Indian Ford. We let people know that we were going to do this about a month ahead of time, so people could rake and deposit their trimmings and their needles out on the road where we could get at them. A lot of people in the community had already raked and either hauled their own or contracted to have their stuff hauled before we got to it. But we did 26 households. We used a tractor, as you can see in the picture here, for a little bit, but it's tough to pick up pine needles and pine cones with a tractor. We had a few brush piles, limb trimmings and stuff that we could use. We did a little bit of safety work because of the nature of the COVID-19 requirements these days. We asked people not to ride together outside of their family groups, back and forth from the dump. We tried to practice as much social distancing and masking as was practical, and people did pretty well. We also spent some time and gave people a little safety briefing on just the physical risks of lifting and driving and backing and hauling and trying to work more than a couple of people at a time around trailers with pitchforks. That can be pretty entertaining, but nobody got hurt. And like I said, we got 40 trailer loads hauled to the dump and moved over nearly 140 cubic yards of material in those 2 days. Had some things I'd do differently when I do it again. Hopefully we'll do this next year. I would start the planning and notification process a good deal sooner. I think 6 weeks to 8 weeks is reasonable. And then I would remind people every couple of weeks. We have people in the subdivision that don't read email or don't have email, and they didn't know about our project. So we would plan next time to post some signs in the neighborhood at the entrances, and possibly hand out flyers to let people know that we were going to do this, and ask for volunteers and try to generate some more volunteers. Doing it earlier allows people to plan around having their stuff removed and get their raking done, and maybe not spend money on having it hauled by somebody else if they know that we're going to do it for them. It also gives us an opportunity to let people know what we're going to do, what we're willing to haul, and where they need to put it. We had a few folks that thought it would be a good time to get rid of just sort of general household garbage. And so they parked out along the road and hoped that we would haul it. And we had to disappoint those folks. We also had some challenges with just where material got placed in terms of being able to park next to it safely and load, or even get to it with a tractor and trailer or a truck and a trailer. So a little more planning, a little more notification would have allowed us to address some of those things. I would also highly recommend, if you do an event like this, that you ask people to let you know that they want their material hauled, send you an email, give you a phone call or whatever, so you can build a list of the work that needs to be done. It also gives you an opportunity to scout the sites and avoid a quarter-mile uphill backing situation onto a busy road. Had I looked at the site sooner, I might not have done that way. So it gives you a chance to scout and make sure that stuff is where you can get at it safely. I'd strongly urge that whoever coordinates one of these things, don't just sort of let it happen organically, and sort of organize your volunteers, give them an action plan in writing that assigns them specific places and tasks to do the work, and outlines who's working with whom, and write it down and give them something that you can hand out at a morning gathering when you get started, so that everybody knows what their job is, and you don't duplicate efforts and you don't miss anything. Very important part. Finally, I think I would note that we considered trying to contract some of the work, hire somebody to come in and do some hauling for us, because we knew we weren't going to be able to get everything that we had out there. We actually did get about 99% of it. I think we got all but one household, which ended up being mine, completed, of the ones that were raked and ready to roll. But we did consider doing some contracting. It's just very, very expensive to hire a crew with a trailer and a truck to come in and haul for a day. If you have a $500 grant, that's not going to buy you a whole lot with a contract crew. It also tends to discourage volunteers. We had a number of people tell me that they would have volunteered, but they thought that we were hiring to have this done and paying for somebody to do it, and they didn't feel like they needed to contribute. So I think we could have made that more clear, but we may consider some form or some partial contracting in the future. I saw one question pop up, and is there anything else that I can add?
So I had a couple of questions for you, Rod. Do you guys have an info board already? Is that how, as far as like people that don't have email? Because I feel like that's a pretty common one, is how do you reach everybody? Is there an info board at the entrance to your HOA or your neighborhood?
No, there's not. We've got, it's relatively uncomplicated. There's only really 2 ways in and out of most of the subdivisions, so we could post reader boards or something at those entrances, but we don't have any general signboard or anything like that.
Okay. And then the other question, how many volunteers did you have total when you did this?
Well, we had 13, and that includes 3 of Ben Dudah's kids and 1 other kid. But we had representatives from basically 6 households. We had 5 trailers and trucks hauling.
Okay. And then the other, I had it written down. I wrote too many things in one spot right here. It's okay. I think I wrote over the top myself. So we had another question here from Chris Babbs as well. How do you deal with absentee second homeowners? Did you guys, how do you feel on that? That's a common question with everybody.
Yeah, we had, so the notice went out, the invitation went out to everyone in the HOA, including absentees. We hauled for a number of absentee residents that had raked or had somebody rake their property, and that was fine. Nobody had any objections to that. I think there's only there's only 3 empty lots in the subdivision now that don't have a house on them, and we didn't do anything with those, and that is something that we need to address in the future, because those are problem areas for sure.
Yeah, yeah, and it's interesting. You talked about creating the list of folks that are interested in it, and I think Ed's probably going to talk about this. I don't know how far we're diving into it with grant tips, but part of the process of lining up some of those curbside chipping, very similar to what you've done here, is generating that list of folks that are going to participate, and then generating the list of folks that actually bring something out to the curb to make sure that that's getting to the contractors when they go to pick it up, whether that's volunteers out of the community or whoever's coming by. Yeah, and then the idea of the action plan and the assignments, and then having that as a handout. That's a really nice one. I feel like that's just because I know your background out of working the fire side of things, we always think about action plans and having handouts when we do the briefings. And it's sometimes those things can be quite obvious, but when we don't do them, well, you really feel it. And getting ahead of that ball is a pretty big one. Okay, does anybody have any additional questions here that they'd like to ask? I see Jeff Conrad asked, how does the curbside chipping program work? But we can, I think we're going to cover that, Jeff, here in a little bit with Ed when he talks. I think he'll talk a little bit more into that. And if he doesn't, then we can circle back to that towards the end of our presentation today. So we'll make sure we don't miss that one. Does anybody have any questions for Rod? Totally appreciate it, Rod. This is a pretty good one this year. I thought it was pretty awesome that you guys became Firewise recognized in December. It looks like reading everything on the portal, Firewise portal, you guys became recognized on Christmas Eve. And then
I think that's right.
Yeah, and then coming all the way around to the spring and actually lining up and pre-planning enough to have the event line up with the fire-free days worked out well, especially when all of that was so, it was up in the air as we were planning it forward. But lots of good points in there, and we can circle back to them later. But the things that I heard in there that I thought were awesome was planning early, getting that notification out 6 to 8 weeks ahead of time, so people have plenty of notification, doing more than just a one-pronged approach to getting the word out there, so you are hitting more of your community, and then sending those reminders or getting reminders out every couple of weeks. And then the other piece I thought was the action plan with assignments, and doing those reminders would be the place for the garbage, but also getting that action plan out with assignments so people know what to expect and what they're up against when it does happen. Pretty good stuff. And the other thing, Rod, I thought was interesting, you said we only had 26 people participate, but I would feel that was pretty successful. Seeing 26 people participate in the first year probably really impacted a lot of those folks that didn't participate. They saw what happened, and I bet you the other 74 people or 74 lots in there are probably wishing that they would have. And next year I would expect you're going to have quite the turnout.
Yeah, I expected. I'm a little worried about that, honestly. I expect the workload to double, but not necessarily the volunteer numbers.
Yeah.
So it'll be a challenge.
Yeah, you made reference to using the tractor with pine needles, and it was just picturing that was probably a pretty tough effort.
Yeah, it didn't work.
Yeah. Okay, well, I think, go ahead.
No, that's all. I'm good.
Okay.
All right.
Looks like, Dean, do you have a question?
Well, no, I just had a comment in reference to this last procedure that was described. We have gone through this, I would say, at least 6 years in a row. And the one thing I would suggest is momentum builds up over time. When we first had our roadside chipping, our sweat equity program, there was a lot of information that needed to be digested by our residents. And so it was kind of labor intensive in terms of getting the information out. But now it's almost like a plug-in. we have a bulletin board right next to our mailboxes. I post a bulletin about the coming project, and almost everybody already knows exactly how it works. And the idea of sweat equity is great because you don't have owners sitting around wondering when they are going to come along and take care of things. They have participation in it. They have buy-in, and they understand that they're expected to participate in the program. And I think everybody's enthusiastic about it. So we typically get, I don't know, 50 to 55 participants at least each year, and we have massive piles. And everybody understands the rules about don't put your trash out there. I mean, over time, that gets filtered out. And I think it's a matter of repetition. And I honestly think that if this is your first time through this, it's going to get easier. So that's about it.
Yeah, thank you, Dean, for that. So I have a couple of questions. I make the assumption that you've already got forms that you fill out, flyers that you send out when you do hit the go button on all of this.
Well, I have a more or less boilerplate announcement. I just changed the dates on it from previous years. As far as registering goes, that has been done by the county in the past. And there was a little bit of difficulty in that the link that was given was something that needed to be written down, and it was voluminous. There must have been at least 15 characters, and it was very easy to get it wrong. So it was kind of difficult for people to write it down and then go home and enter it in their computer and go online and register. And my one comment at the end of it last year was, is there some way to simplify that link, make it easier for people to register?
Yeah, and we can, there are tools, we're getting into the weeds here, but there are tools to do that where we can shorten that URL. So it's something that's easy, like a tiny URL.com/ name of your community or something. And that will get them to us. It's easy to remember. And then the other one that is nice, not everybody always likes to use it, are those QR codes that kind of you can scan with your phone and it takes you directly to the form. But adding those to the flyers helps out quite a bit too. But if we
and as far as our situation in terms of what we have to document, that went to the idea of keeping track of hours spent accumulating roadside debris.
Yeah, for tracking. Yeah.
In order to give that information to the county so that they can see exactly how successful it was.
Yep. And also show that match.
Yeah.
If it's required. Yep. So if maybe Dean, afterwards, you and I can connect through email. And if you don't mind, maybe we can share if you're open to it, but sharing some of the documents, and then we can use that as a resource as well to follow up with this.
Yeah.
Okay. I see Phil Paterno has a question. Were we able to work around and under utility lines, and was there any prescribed fire? Did the project include any prescribed fire during the winter? I think I could probably answer that, but Rod, if you wanted to.
Well, there's no power lines in the subdivision. All the utilities are underground, so we didn't have that issue. I don't see the question on prescribed fire. What was that, Boone?
It's asking if you did any, and I would assume that he's probably thinking about burning piles versus taking it.
Yeah, there was a little bit that got done early in the spring, but the county shut the burning down a little earlier this year than normal, or the fire district. So folks didn't get a lot done. But typically there's a fair amount of pile burning that goes on in here.
Yeah. That was luckily, I was pretty happy that fire free was extended to kind of help compensate for that this year.
Yeah,
and I think it showed in our numbers this year. Okay, well, I don't want to run us out of time, but so I'm going to try to keep us on schedule. But next up, we're gonna transition over to Marlena. So Marlena, I'm gonna flip the slide over to your introductory slide, and then, are you there, Marlena? I saw her a minute ago. Now I don't see her. Oh, there she is. Oh, you're on mute. You're on mute right now.
There you go.
Okay,
I'm
I'm gonna
here.
stop. I'm gonna stop sharing, so you should be able to hit the share button.
Perfect.
Grab the screen from me.
All right.
Marlena is she works for Aperion Management Group. She's a community manager, and then she does lots of project planning. So I'll let her introduce herself further.
Okay. All right, I'm Marlena. I'm with Aperion Management Group, and I'm going to be discussing systematic project planning. First, a little bit about myself. Again, I'm from Aperion Management Group. We are a property management company, or community management company rather, that manages HOAs all over Oregon. We have about 140 years worth of combined experience for all of our community managers, which is quite helpful because all of those individuals have had basically 140 years worth of learning experiences that we get to learn from before we make any sort of mistakes. We are going to be going over the basics of who, what, when, and where, and then we're going to get into some nitty-gritty details regarding budgeting, event timeline, locations, and permissions. And we're also going to go over what to expect as far as the unexpected and how to prepare for that. Okay, let's do this. Many of you are aware the requirements for achieving the ever-coveted Firewise designation include education and action. Ideally, a community should host 2 separate events, one for the education, one for the action, and also to get your hours. Education-based events, this would be a community event or a party during the, in which Project Wildfire or the Firewise Committee or the Firewise speakers would come and talk about Firewise standards. During the meeting, you can during the meeting, you can hand out Firewise material or provide them with links to obtain further information at their own convenience. A good opportunity to do this educational event is at the HOA's annual meeting. If you are having an event within your own community, you can use someone's home with the owner's permission to go over items such as defensible space. Please remember this could run the risk of embarrassment for your neighbors, so please ensure that you have permission before you are picking on their home. As far as action-based events, get those hours in so that you can either achieve or renew your Firewise status. This can include green waste disposal by either renting large bins for owners to haul and dump their green waste into them, or you could offer curbside disposal or curbside chipping by utilizing landscape companies or volunteers. Great, I'm in. Who else is in? There are 3 entities working hand in hand on these projects. There's the Firewise Committee, the Board of Directors, and management. Although many communities may have one or the other, some don't have management companies, some don't even have a Firewise Committee, and the board handles all this. This is usually the easiest way to get the projects going smoothly. Let's talk about the roles for each entity. The roles should be decided on and agreed upon amongst all parties. While the roles may be different, this is the most popular one. The Firewise Committee, this is the heart and soul of the association's efforts to become Firewise. This committee would be responsible for the planning of the event. Typically, the Firewise Committee works in conjunction with the management company to take advantage of previous experience and knowledge of the programs. The Board of Directors, this is the decision-making entity that approves or denies plans based on the management or the Firewise Committee's recommendation. The board is responsible for the approval of spending association funds for such events. Management, This is the feet on the ground entity that is making the arrangements and paying the bills accordingly. Management takes direction from the board of directors, who takes recommendations from the Firewise Committee. The nitty gritty. Now we're going to talk about budgeting. These events cost money, and here's how to find the funding. Your association's annual budget. Depending on the extent of the event, your association will create a budget which may include allowances for such event. If this event is not budgeted for in your annual budget, then check your financials to see if you have any leeway or like a contingency or miscellaneous line item expense that they can pull from. Otherwise, you may find some wiggle room in other areas that have a higher budget than what was actually spent. For example, if you were expecting Snowmageddon 3 and you budgeted $10,000 for snow removal, but you only spent about $2,000, then you have an excellent cushion. And as you all know, with the drier winters, it's more important than ever to get these events in. There's also outside assistance and grants. If finances are thin, you could consider applying for a grant for county assistance to cover the cost of rentals and services. The bottom line, be smart with your association's money and ensure that you're not spending more than your association can comfortably afford. Gathering estimates and quotes. Firm quotes are most attainable when arranging educational events, as venue rentals, supplies, and catering will offer firm quotes. Action-based events are a little bit different. They are more estimate-driven. However, it is still fairly simple to gather a rough estimate of how much your project will be. Waste disposal companies have set pricing for bin rentals and can provide you with an estimate as far as how much each disposal will cost. Landscapers typically work on a time and materials basis, so obtaining a formal quote is quite difficult. However, if they have performed the type of work you're requesting for other communities, then you can compare the size of that community with the size of your community. And if they're willing to disclose what they charge that other community, you can kind of get an idea of where you would be looking at your association's community for their services. There are many different options for cutting costs while still getting a successful project done. Some associations involve charitable organizations in which the homeowners would pay them for their services directly via donations. Sometimes this saves the association money by the organization hauling the green waste to the dump directly rather than filling up the association's bins, which then costs the association for the dumping fees. When and where. Correlating with Firewise or county events, Deschutes County does annual fire-free programs as well as workshops throughout the year. If your plan is action-based for hours, then it would be financially smart to plan around the county's fire-free program. If it is educational based, maybe plan it around a time where a workshop is being held to ensure the owners have a fresh interest in joining the workshops. Be cautious of demand. Plan ahead to ensure your association has the best chances of obtaining what they need to have a successful project. For example, large containers from the waste disposal companies will be reserved in advance by a lot of different people, so they may run out before your event. Along the same lines, landscape companies, their schedules will fill up really fast around this time, so make sure that you have your reservations and your scheduled services far in advance so that you have what you need. Locations and permissions. Are you planning on hosting this event within your community's own common area? Perfect, that's super easy. Are you using common area that is not maintained by your sub-association, but is maintained by a master association? Then you would have to reach out to the master association and get their express permission. If you're using a neighborhood park, for example, to store bins, like what we do for one of my communities, then you would have to reach out to whoever maintains that park. For me, it's the Parks and Rec Department, and request their permission. The rule of thumb to increase your chances of continuing to get approval year after year is to just make sure that everything is cleaned up Leave the space better than you found it. All right, everything's sure to go seamlessly, right? No. We've all learned from the past few months that nothing goes as expected anymore. The association must take into account small and large issues that may come up and devise a game plan for unexpected hiccups that will occur during your event. Case in point, one of my association's fire-free month-long projects hit right at the same time as the COVID-19 pandemic. The Firewise Committee immediately considered pulling the plug on the entire project. How would we ensure the safety of the members if multiple people are touching and handling the same bins? How will individuals with suppressed immune systems participate? I called several landscape companies 2 days before the event to see if anyone would be willing to go around to our 800-unit single-family home community and pick up green waste as collected by the owners and then set on their curb. There was only one company that said that they might be able to pull it off, but it would have added $10,000 to the bill, which was obviously not budgeted for and then therefore fiscally irresponsible. Instead, we got creative and we took the following steps. The Firewise Committee committed to visiting the bin sites on a regular basis. They would monitor the amount of people out in line or using the bins, and they would notify me when they noticed a larger gathering. I would immediately send out an email blast asking people to reconsider their drop-off times to less hectic times of the day. We encourage users to wipe down all the ladder rungs before and after use with disinfectant and to keep their kids and their pets at home. I contacted the association's insurance company as well as our legal counsel to inquire about any liability and how to protect the association against it. We also developed a volunteer program. We matched volunteers with those in need on the basis of their load size and their ability to, excuse me, and their ability to move how much material. Were they using the trunk of a car, an SUV, a hitched trailer? As planned, owners who needed assistance would reach out to me directly, provide me with their information, their address, the load amount needing to be removed, and I would match up the volunteers accordingly. Although we received many volunteers, we really didn't receive any takers, and I think it was probably because we did it 2 days before the event. Those that did volunteer seemed to be genuinely excited to be of service. If this was taken advantage of, this would have absolutely strengthened their sense of community, which was super important during this pandemic. In the end, our association's Firewise events are becoming more successful year after year. Coupling education and action events with some email blasts and newsletters sprinkled through helps keep everyone safe. Are there any questions?
There we go. I had myself on mute as well when I was talking. There was a question about charitable organizations. Do you guys, have you used any charitable organizations for hauling of the debris to the dump?
We used the Boy Scouts of America. Unfortunately, the first year that they did it, well, they've only done it 1 year. We did not have them do it during COVID-19. I was a hard no. They did not use the bins from what I understand. However, we did ask them at the end for the next coming years to see if they can go ahead and just move it to the dump.
Yeah. Okay. Do you have a list of those charitable organizations that do that, or just the Boy Scouts were the only ones?
We just used the Boy Scouts. I didn't want to necessarily call them out just in case they didn't want to do it anymore, which I don't think. I don't think that's the case, but So just kind of lumped them in with charitable organizations. And I'm really sorry, my computer has totally frozen, so I can't see anything. So I apologize if I'm making a very strange face while I'm clicking around.
Yeah, no, that's all right. The yeah, I guess along those lines when you say that with the Boy Scouts, I can't imagine, right? I mean, that's a bunch of little kids doing some pretty heavy lifting at times.
Well, it's mostly the adults that are doing it, but
Yeah. Okay. And there's another question from Jeff Conrad. How many years have you run the Firewise events?
well, I have been doing it for about 2 years now, but I come from another area that did not have Firewise, unfortunately.
Yeah.
When I came to Central Oregon and I started at Aperion, I realized how huge this was, and I immediately wanted to be involved. I mentioned that we have, 140 years of combined experience with all the managers. A lot of that is with Firewise projects. So I was able to get started with a really good backbone on this because of my team.
Okay. And then I had a couple of questions just because I think it'll kind of ties into the talk earlier, but timeline as far as, so let me lay this out a couple of different ways, or a different way, but generally speaking, most of your stuff is a dumpster or a couple of bins for the community to dump in. And then timeline of all that, when do you usually reserve the bins? When are you thinking ahead?
As soon as we receive word from you when the Fire Free program is going on.
Okay. Okay. No pressure. Yeah. Okay. And then, so you reserve the bins, and at that same time, that's usually about the time that you do the first notification to the residents.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
And that's,
And
and
I
if
do-
I, thinking back, I think it's probably 8 to 12 weeks ahead of time, somewhere in that area that we're thinking the first email of Fire Free is coming out is somewhere around 2 months. I think that's what I have in my notes.
Yeah, and that allows the owners who are planning on hiring landscapers, because some of the, for one of my associations, some of the lots are quite large, and it's very tedious for homeowners to do their own, also with vacant lots. So this allows them the ample time that they need to contact their own landscapers and make those reservations for services.
Okay. And then have you done the bins on privately owned lots, or is it pretty much always in the common areas that you've done those?
It's actually the parks within the community that are not maintained by us. It's by the Parks and Rec department.
Okay. So yeah, Ben, Parks and Rec.
Yeah.
And then you got a question for Bert Newmeyer. Marlena, are you responsible for HOAs in Bend?
Yes, yes. We do a lot in Bend and Redmond and really all over Oregon.
Yeah. Oh, all over Oregon. I actually thought you were just here in Deschutes County, mostly in Bend.
Yeah, yeah. We're expanding.
Okay. How many do you have a guesstimate of how many you guys have here in Deschutes County?
Oh, and Deschutes, I would say it's probably about 45.
Okay. Yeah, that's quite a few.
Yes, yes, yes. It could actually be more, but
Yeah. Yeah. I knew of I can list off 4 or 5, but not 45. And then this year with the COVID and then the Fire Free dates, those all changed. Maybe I missed it a minute ago. How much did that throw you off this year?
well, luckily we were able to get that grant. So it really didn't affect us financially as much as it probably would have if we didn't obtain that.
Yeah, because you can, correct me if I'm wrong, right? You can rent the bins, fill them up with the yard debris, and then they can go in for the Fire Free, and that gets dumped free.
Yes, yes.
Oh, Boone?
Yeah.
This is Ray.
Hey, Ray.
A question, 2 questions. One, how do your residents get their debris into the bins?
They usually transport them in bags, and we do have ladders outside of the bins, and they can climb up there and dump it, or there's a large door at the end of the bins, and they can just kind of climb up there and dump it too. We make sure that they don't include any trash or bags in the actual green waste containers. We have trash cans out there so that they can dispose of those accordingly.
what kind of debris are they bringing out? Is it mostly leaves, pine needles? Because we have a lot of limbs, brush,
Yep.
pine needles, pine cones, but we also have not tree stumps, but people have taken down some of the trees, and they'll take some of the sectioned up trunks. Have you got something like that? And how do people get that into the dump?
Honestly, I don't know how they do it, but I know that they do it.
Yeah, I know. We've had a friend whose neighborhood did that for a while, and they actually had to post somebody there to make sure what was going in. And the problem they had was once it was full to the point where they had to close the back doors, people just couldn't put it up over the bins. Is there a way that you have to get around that?
Yes, this year, so the first year that Aperion did it for this community, we were overwhelmed by the amount of people that used it. This year, we decided to pre-schedule the pickups to every other day, and even then, they were overflowing. So we also had our regular landscaper on hand to check the parks on a daily basis and remove any excess material that may have fallen off, any trash, etc., and just kind of make sure that everything is not overflowing. It helped a lot this year.
Now, my question was, once the doors are closed,
Mhm.
what's the method for the homeowners to get their debris into the dumpster?
Then they would use the ladder on the side.
Oh, they were able to do that, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. The other question I have is, we use contractors to do sweat equity during fire free and hauling away. The biggest problem we have is not knowing how much is coming out. They have a hard time estimating what it's going to cost. We have an absolute fixed budget that we cannot go into debt. All right. Have you ever got situations where homeowners, you have associations like that? And how do you manage to get a firm estimate? And what do you do if it overruns? Do you go in there with a fixed cost and say that's it? Or how?
It really depends on the landscape company that you're using. As I mentioned in the PowerPoint, it's very difficult to get a fixed cost. If you have a hard budget, you can tell the landscaper this is the end. If there's any other debris left after that, after you reach that benchmark, then please leave it there. And then after that, you can maybe get some volunteers or have the Firewise and board of directors kind of work together to see if they can remove the remaining items. This is also where email blasts and the phone tree would work really well to notify the owners ahead of time. Hey, we're getting close to our budget. Let's hold off. If you can wait, remind if you're doing it during the fire free program, remind them about the fire free program so that they can go ahead and utilize that and take it to the dump themselves. But yes, it's very difficult to get everything under budget unless you're firm.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions right now for Marlena? I don't see any, but I do see that Leslie Allison said that they use Aperion, and they are a great help in coordinating Firewise events, which is pretty awesome. I know this year Marlena and I were talking quite a bit prior to Fire Free. We have some old Fire Free signs that are not really in use anymore, and we did offer a couple of those up at their dumpster sites just to put out there that it's to kind of encourage people to bring stuff in and remind them that it is fire-free stuff. And I like to think that helped to eliminate some of that garbage going into it, but who knows?
It definitely does.
Okay. Well, I think we're at a point right now, unless there's another question, but at a point that let's do a 5-minute break. Everyone can grab a cup of coffee and then come back, and then we'll jump in with Ed with grants and tips for successful grant projects. So 5 minutes, and I'll see you guys back in just a minute. How you doing, Ed?
Doing fine.
I know we're running over our time, but at the same time, there's that little piece built in at the end. It looks like we'll still have time for everything.
I think so. Yeah, I think we've got time at the end to kind of actually use.
Okay. Looking through to make sure we didn't miss any questions here. People are trickling back in. I see cameras coming back on. Give everyone another second or two here. Okay, well, I think we'll get started again. Let me share my screen real quick, but next up will be Ed Keith. I think everyone's pretty familiar with Ed, but if not, I'll let him introduce himself, a county forester for Deschutes County. All you, Ed.
Great. Thanks, Boone. Yeah, hi, everybody. My name is Ed Keith. I work for Deschutes County as the county forester. I've worked with several of you over the years, but haven't met all of you. So hope to get to meet you all in person at some point. But thanks for joining us today. We wanted to provide a little bit of time just to discuss grants. We thought that this would fit in well with figuring out how to get projects done on the ground, is sometimes that does take more than just volunteers. You need some other resources potentially, and sometimes those could be relatively inexpensive. They might just be food that brings people into volunteer their time, or it may be some fuel for saws and people to make trips to the transfer station or landfill. Or it may be something a little bit more, it might be printing to help you with your outreach for those folks that don't use email, or it may be hiring a contractor if that's what you need to do. So regardless of your need, sometimes it does take some funding to help get these projects on the ground. So we're going to touch on that a little bit with some kind of general grant considerations, but I will be speaking a little bit more specifically. This past year, so well, let me back up one step. In the past, we've worked with several communities, especially as they're beginning to work on Firewise, to help them out with their initial projects. And a lot of those projects were funded by grants that we had on hand from other entities. A lot of those grants have come from the U.S. Forest Service. Has a grant program for what is called community assistance. We've had a few different funding opportunities that have come through FEMA and various other partners. And those have all been for purely for getting work done on the ground in regards to paying contractors to do fuel reduction or helping you with your fuel reduction through some contracted capacity. This past year, we had a little different opportunity in that the Board of County Commissioners actually provided some discretionary lottery funds for the purpose of facilitating work in either Firewise communities or communities that are working to become Firewise. So there's, they might not have gone through the entire process yet, but they're working on that process. So the Board of County Commissioners in mid-fall of last year, 2019, actually made $40,000 available through that grant program. And so I'm going to be speaking a little bit specifically to things that you might be thinking about if you were to submit a future grant application through that program. But hopefully these tips will be applicable as well as if you're looking at a grant through like the NFPA State Farm opportunity that comes around every year for Wildfire Preparedness Day. That's usually the first weekend in May. And those are typically $500. The county's grants range from somewhere around $1,000 up to $4,000 each. We actually had, for that $40,000, we had $102,000 worth of requests. So you all did really great in coming through with proving that there is a need out there to get some of this work done in a big way. So a few considerations on what you might consider when a grant opportunity comes your way for your community. The first one is I'd say just generally do your homework. So give a good read to, typically there's going to be a grant announcement out there, and give that a good read and make sure that this grant is actually a good fit for what you want to do. There's nothing worse than trying to pound a square peg into a round hole. And if it's not a good fit, it may not be worth your time to apply. You really want to match up your goals with the goals of the particular grant. So give that a good read. Make sure that the grant is a good fit for what you're trying to accomplish before you put your time into planning the project and coming up with a budget and all the time that it takes to actually put an application together potentially. We'll try to help you out as well, as we hear from people and they're looking for funding or a project that they want to implement. It may feel sometimes if you contact myself or Boone or even somebody from the Oregon Department of Forestry like Ariel or Chase, that it might feel like we're giving you a little bit of the runaround, but we're actually trying to find what the best fit is going to be for what you're actually trying to accomplish. So you may call one of us and it may sound like your project is a better fit for somebody else, and we'll try to help you out with that as well. The different funding sources that are out there aren't a one size fits all, I'd say. So, a roadside chipping project that one community wants to do may not be a fit for funding that, say, the Oregon Department of Forestry might have, but we might have a grant that could help you out, or vice versa. So, just matching up your needs to the particular funding source that's out there is your first consideration, I would say. Once you do find some funding that might be a good fit, I would say make sure to go back and revisit what your Firewise action plan is as well, and make sure that what you're doing is trying to further those needs, because hopefully your board and your community's already kind of bought into what's in your action plan when it was written. So be giving some considerations to the fact that you already have a plan, and that those priorities should hopefully be informing what your community's already hopefully agreed to in what you're wanting to accomplish out of being involved in Firewise. As Rod mentioned and other people brought up as well, it's really important to start outreach early. I'd say even, you know, before you have funding, in some cases, you might kind of test the waters and make sure that you have buy-in for a particular project, because there's nothing worse than putting in the effort of going to get the funding and then finding out that you don't have any buy-in in the community. So it may be time to actually start your outreach as you're formulating your grant, to make sure that you have buy-in if you haven't done a project like this in the past. If you have done, like Dean has mentioned, and know that you have a particular level of participation you can expect, you might hold off on your outreach, but it may be time, if you have an HOA meeting coming up, to bring this up and make sure that people know that this is a potential project, engage some buy-in. Another thing I'd say you want to think of is really think about what outcomes you're trying for. Make sure that they're actually reasonable and achievable for the resources you're asking for. So don't try to overpromise and then not be able to fulfill your requirements that you committed to through your grant application. So think about those outcomes and what's actually achievable for the funds you're actually looking for, and that you can actually measure those so that you can report back. Because with most grants that we have, there's going to be some measurements as far as how many lot owners might have participated, how many hours that are they going to contribute, how many yards, cubic yards or acres are going to be treated, or whatever may be counted, how many property owners are going to receive that outreach and education piece. So and then of course, you know, deciding exactly what you're going to do. So there's a variety of approaches, as you've heard today, and not all of those look the same. So for one neighborhood that might want to do some roadside chipping, that might not be a fit for another neighborhood, but providing that centralized dumpster for debris pickup might be a fit for a community that roadside chipping might not work in. So working all those details out in advance about exactly what you're going to try to execute, and really just having that thoughtful process in advance, I think is really important. Also, I would say make sure that you're not applying for grants that is going to be apparent to the people reviewing your grant that it's going to happen anyway. I've seen a few of those through the years where it comes through pretty clearly that this project has already been planned, it's already been budgeted for, and then all of a sudden this grant opportunity came along. And I'd say those aren't going to rank out as well as ones that are kind of happen organically through this planning process that we're talking about. So those are a few of the considerations for our Firewise grant program. We actually had then a scoring system that tiered out to the criteria that came out in our grant announcement. So a few of those that we looked at were, was it going to be actually achievable with the funds that you've requested? An important consideration that we looked at that I think is really important, just because there is much more of a demand for these dollars than what's available, is how much match are you able to provide? So that match may come in the form of actual cash match from say HOA dues or fees that people pay to buy into participating in the program. Those may be in-kind time that each homeowner provides, and we usually look at the hours that are being provided, and then look at the national volunteer rate that runs just a little bit right now, over $25 an hour. So that time that your community puts in is really valuable when people are looking at deciding who, you know, if your community isn't going to participate and you're just going to hire a contractor with these funds, it's not going to rank out near as high as some buy-in from the community in the form of either hours spent or other dollars invested in being a partner in this project. So a lot of grant programs will have a requirement that you have at least a 25% match. In the projects that come out with 50% match look really appealing from the point of view of somebody that's giving you dollars. We also looked at the scope. So communities that had a full-on outreach plan that were going to include everybody in their neighborhood, as opposed to maybe just a couple lots or their common areas only, and didn't include the scope of actually creating defensible space around people's houses. Those didn't rank out as well as those that were really focused in on defensible space. And that just goes back to making sure that you read up on the actual grant you're applying for, and then coming up with a program that matches those goals. So those goals may be different from grant to grant, but and then comparing what your actual outcomes are going to be versus the investment you're asking for. So you know, if we get 20 applications and I've got you know, a couple that are only asking for maybe $1,500, but you know, they're going to include, you know, in the 10s or 20s or 30s of homeowners, versus somebody that's asking for $3,000 or $4,000, and they're going to just treat a couple acres of their common areas. You might guess how those might rank out, but so ones that involve more people, show that participation, are typically going to rate out better. And then for our grants, we were also looking for an outreach component. So not just the doing of the work, but actually explaining to people what defensible space looks like, what it means, that you're going to actually reach the whole community. And it's not just 2 or 3 people in the community. They're going to do this project for people, ranked out better as well. So those were a few considerations that we looked at that I think will probably span across other funding sources as well. I would say, like I said, we were really lucky this last year with the discretionary lottery funds to get a start on this program at $40,000. With the COVID-19 situation and the way that lottery dollars have been impacted by that, it was looking like we weren't going to have any dollars available for this program this year. The board did decide actually just on Monday that they will be putting some dollars into this program again this year. It looks like about 20,000, so a little bit less, but it's better than zero, especially given the situation that we're in with the dramatic decrease in lottery dollars being available this year from the state. So we will be looking at something like this again with a limited amount of dollars. They will be focused on Firewise communities. So those that have organized around Firewise, to me, that shows that the whole community is on board versus just 1 or 2 people, and that you've invested in kind of the long term of making your community safe. And so that's really where we're going to prioritize, trying to help you all out in getting some of this work done here in the future. There are other funding sources out there for people. Some of those are kind of come and go. And some of those include other county grants that aren't this discretionary lottery funds, where we actually assist with hiring a contractor. The Oregon Department of Forestry also has grants available in some areas. Those come and go from time to time. And Chase and Ariel are with us here today. And they've, I think, provided their contact information in the chat earlier. So you can look for their contact information as well. And see if what you want to do might match up with any of their grant funding that they have available from time to time. And like I say, the State Farm National Fire Protection Association grants that come available each year, those are relatively small, but have actually helped people rent chippers in their neighborhood or host other Firewise events. So I'd say don't look past those just because of the amount, because that may be a really good source. We've been pretty fortunate in Deschutes County where neighborhoods have applied for those, and I think there was 4 this year that got awarded here, and there's been a number over the years. So that's another source for you. And with that, I think we'll go to questions, and looks like Bob Poley sent me one asking who decided, or who were the decision makers for this past round of county grants. And so so I asked a variety of partners that participate with Project Wildfire that were the not non-community member types. So we had a couple different fire department representatives, as well as a representative from the Oregon Department of Forestry. And we agreed to a scoring of how we were going to score based on those factors that I just went through. And then assigned a score to each of those, and then looked at the available funding we had versus what was requested, and tried to balance those out accordingly. Yeah, Bert was asking about the rubric for the grants in general, and yeah, we can provide the factors that for future county grants. As this rolls out into our next budget year that starts in July, we'll be planning an announcement probably for late summer, and we'll probably host something like this again. And actually, for those that are interested and want to learn more about that opportunity, including the scoring that went into those grants and the considerations of each of those factors, we'll host something like this so that you'll all have a kind of even playing field for what we're looking for, not just in an application, but at what kind of projects we're actually looking for. Alexis asked, apply early. When is early? Well, it depends on the particular grant as far as what the timeline is. I would start the process of working with your community as soon as you see an announcement, and that's what I guess I'd say by early is don't wait until the deadline for the announcement, because there's particular things that you may need to do with members of your community that might take a little bit of time, as far as developing a budget, deciding what's achievable, how you're going to do the outreach, those sorts of things. So I would say, and we try to share those early on and often, but don't wait until the deadline or a couple days before the deadline, or you're probably going to struggle to pull all the details together that may be required for grant application. And Ray is asking if neighborhoods that were awarded a grant this year, can they be funded again next year? Being that I thought that we were going to get $0, and I just found out on Monday, I haven't given a huge amount of thought to that, but I'd say yes, we will open that up to people that have received grants previously. We may need to factor that in somehow, because I anticipate with that limited amount of funding that again, we'll have to prioritize that and narrow it down. But I wouldn't say that it will be exclusive to new neighborhoods. It'll be open to everybody, but it might be a factor in evaluating. Alexis asked, where do you hear about a grant being offered? Boone has a pretty extensive mailing list. We try to get those funding opportunities out to communities when we feel like they're relevant. So look for emails from Boone. We do also try to post those if you're so inclined on social media. We do have both a Facebook and Twitter account. So if you want to tune into either one of those, we'll pass those along on as many platforms as possible. So email, social media are both ways to find out about those. And even if the funding isn't coming through us at Deschutes County or Project Wildfire, if we learn of other external funding, we'll try to pass that along to you when we learn about those opportunities ourselves. And I think that's all the questions. So we are, did I miss any, Boone?
No, that was pretty thorough. I appreciate it. There was a couple questions I had, and then you answered it before we got too far in it. Yeah, and I think for sake of time, we're going to need to continue on to transition into our group discussions. We've got a pretty good sized group today. I was just looking, it looks like we're right at 50 folks that joined us today, which is pretty awesome. So let's see. Oops, let me get this thing go to the next one. So I think we'll do the breakout room discussion, and there, it dawned on me a little bit ago that I did not do a couple of introductions, but they'll introduce themselves when we go to the breakout room. But we do have Chase Duncan and Ariel Cowan on the call today, and they're going to help us facilitate those group breakouts. And both of them work for Oregon Department of Forestry as stewardship foresters here at on the Prineville Sisters unit. So they both administer grants for fuels reduction work as well, but they can dive deeper into stuff. But we're going to go into our breakout groups. I encourage everybody to come off of mute, ask all those questions that you're holding back on, if you are holding back on any of them. And we're just going to kind of go around the room of asking what projects have you done in the past, and what would you do differently, just so we can kind of spark a little bit of conversation and hear lessons learned from one another. So you'll see.
Just for people that haven't been in breakout rooms yet, I actually put you in a room and we'll have those facilitators. So just to be kind of crystal clear, because we don't want to lose anybody in translation here. There'll be 4 breakout rooms. In one, you'll have a kind of a person that's tasked with making sure the conversation stays on track. But other than that, it'll just be open. And the reason we break you into smaller groups is kind of difficult to have a free-flowing conversation with 20 to 30 people in one room. So we're going to break out into 4 rooms. You'll have a facilitator that'll either be myself or Boone or Chase or Ariel. And then we're just going to try to allow some time for actual discussion that's harder in the larger groups. We're going to allow about 15, 20 minutes for you to just kind of connect with each other and have a little bit of conversation before we bring it back to this full group and kind of wrap up here. So I know that there's been a few people that have dropped off, which is fine. And if you don't want to share, you can just listen in on the conversation as well. But I'm going to go ahead and put us into the breakout groups. Everybody's ready.
Yeah, and the questions are there in the chat box. So if you find yourself in there wanting to refresh on what the questions are, they're right there. And while I was muted, looks like we're all back, or a good portion of us. I chuckled that I said we have about 50 people on here, and it wasn't only a minute or 2 minutes. We dropped that by half. I think everybody are intimidated by the breakout groups, which actually is ironic to me. I enjoy the breakout groups and having everybody be able to talk and converse. It's like, it feels like that's the important piece. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Let's see if I get this going here. Okay, so we're kind of transitioning to that last little bit of wrap up for the day. But before we do, we had the 4 groups, right? And since I'm talking, I'm going to jump first, and then we'll go around the room of the 4 groups. And what projects have you done in the past? In our group, we just had a couple that were very similar to what we'd already talked about. Marlena was one of the people in my groups, and that was our bin You know, she's done the bin stuff. And then we also had Bert Newmeyer from Tillicum Village, who had the yard debris very similar to Rod's talk with Indian Ford, where it was hauled to the dump. But you know, if there's one thing to do different, and it's one of the things that I think is a reoccurring theme, and we'll see what everyone else says, but it's is outreach, planning the outreach and making sure that you're doing a thorough job of reaching to people. And it's, you know, even after doing it for a few years, like Bert said, he still wishes he'd had a little better outreach program going. And I think he still had great turnout this year. The numbers that he reported were just amazing for one neighborhood to be bringing that much stuff into the dump. I believe he said he did 19 trailer loads over to the dump. That's pretty impressive. But as we go around the room, another group want to volunteer kind of what they discussed.
Sure. This is Ariel Cowan, Oregon Department of Forestry. We had a small group, and only one member of the group had done Project Wildfire projects before. So we had a couple of people who were new and wanting to learn a lot from the experience. So I can at least summarize what that one group member had said that they had learned from in the past, from the work that they had done, was really keeping track of metrics before even starting the project, like number of households that are interested in doing the work, and that also that it would be beneficial next time around to also have a dumpster, because I think the work that they had done, they had the landowners bring the debris out to the roadside, but if they also added the option of a dumpster for folks, that could be beneficial. But another topic was the outreach and the communication, that area can always be improved on. And for one particular reason, there's some landowners who felt that they did not want to participate in helping other landowners to do fuel reduction work. They felt that if someone wanted work done, that someone else should just, that person should just pay for it themselves. And so that could be possibly because they were communicating through email, not face to face. And there's something about that real interaction, face-to-face interaction. And when you see the landowners in the community and how some of them are elderly and would have a hard time actually getting out there to do the work, that it would really make a difference if folks all chipped in to help and do the work, as opposed to it just being each to your own, doing the work on your property. So one idea to improve on that was to discuss that, communicate about that, encouraging everyone to all work together, maybe at one of their HOA meetings. Yeah, I think that pretty much summarizes it.
Thank you, Ariel. Is Chase, are you still with us?
Yeah, I'm here, Ben. So the majority of our projects that we discussed, let me back up real quick. So we had a great group, lot of interaction. So we actually only got to about half of them, unfortunately. But the common theme was doing either individual lot cleanups or common area cleanups, and chipping, burning, and roadside pickup of material was definitely kind of the commonality, I think, between everybody that got to share. Some really good points I noticed. One was having hard dates to sign up and having hard dates to have your material out by. I really like that. I think it's good structure to have. Some problems, obviously costs. is a big one for folks trying to be able to get it done at a rate that can be worked with. And then working with some of the other neighboring communities, you know, and working on some of the issues that are in those other communities and getting them to kind of join in. So, yeah, great discussion.
Awesome. Thank you, Chase. And then Ed.
Yeah, couple highlights, I guess. One is to maybe continue a theme that I've already heard, but just to reinforce it, is that to use a variety of approaches in getting people engaged and how you're doing the outreach. So, you know, there's the kind of easy way of getting things out through email, and that may or may not work for the particular community you're in. I think that does work well in some communities, and it may work well for communities that have already done a project, but definitely not as well for others. So a few other methods that were mentioned were using sandwich boards in a highly trafficked area of the community, using door hangers, and even going door to door. And I could say there was going to be another person that joined us in a community that really struggled for a long period of time trying to get a viable project off the ground. And he came along and actually ended up going door to door. And they went from a project one year where only 3 people participated to one the next where they had like 80 people participated. And the difference was that there was that face-to-face contact and people actually understood what the project was going to be and had the opportunity to ask questions. So that may be something to consider, at least for if you haven't done a project yet, is that you really do need to have a little bit of interaction with people, because they may not be at the level of understanding of the rest of your Firewise board. And then we also talked about how to gauge and manage that participation. So having firm cutoff dates, having you know, clearly communicating what is and isn't acceptable, and even the maximum amount that might be acceptable from an individual property might be something that you think about. And those things seem to come up as things that people are struggling with, but you know, using pictures of what might be acceptable. We have some potential examples of flyers that we've developed that we've learned from other partners. Really, the picture of what an acceptable pile is versus one that is going to be left behind if it looks like that is one example we can share of you for say like roadside chipping or roadside pickup. So those are a couple things.
Okay. Awesome. So we're coming to the end of our time that we allotted, and I know I feel like I'm cutting people short on everything, and there's plenty of discussion that we can continue to have. So I'm going to kind of flip to the next slide and we'll sum this up. But you know, right, like I said before, several of us will be available to talk afterwards, myself and Ed for sure, and whoever else wants to stay on. So just kind of wrapping up thoughts that we had today. We heard from the first time project planning, right? And I think that those themes carried through a lot of all of the pieces that we heard today. You know, Rod talked about wishing that he would have reached out a little bit earlier, sent the reminders, and then building that action plan and assignments, so clarifying the work to get done. So pretty good stuff. And then the yearly planning process, we heard from Marlena, and when she talked through, you know, some of the things that she talked about that were tips for that I felt like resonated with everybody, even in our group discussion, was just that, and Ed hit on it just now, is that having that timeline, having participation lists, and knowing who and what is getting done. And Marlena, one of her bigger projects is usually those bins, which is pretty awesome. You know, a lot of participation out of it, and it can be somewhat of a simple way of getting things done. And then the chat popped up and distracted me for a split second. And then Ed talked through all the tips for grant projects. for planning your grant projects, good stuff in there, right? There was a lot of stuff to be covered that I think that even myself, I'd love to be able to hold that in my head all the time to draw off of. But our plan would be that after we finish this, you know, we'll have some follow-up to this meeting, but more in general, the other piece of it is, as I mentioned this when we started, but the plan, I was originally planning or thinking that we'd be able to follow up, right, immediately afterwards and have all this stuff compiled. And we do a follow-up, but not all inclusive is what I was hoping for. So after this, expect an email that will hold all 3 of our workshops that we had. So if you didn't participate in ones before, you'll be able to watch those through and then see what resources we have there that we've gathered along the way, including the stuff from Bert at Telecom Village with his volunteer waiver form that he'd put together, the stuff that came from NFPA with their, I just went over at the 12 o'clock hour, with all of their, you know, how to approach the community and discuss ways of not putting people, you know, on their heels, not putting people on the defense. So, yeah, so we'll send out the resources that we discussed, the PowerPoints that go along with all of these, and plus some survey questions to follow up, because, right, we want to be thinking about what's next, right? What do we have in our future opportunities? What are we going to be putting together? And as it sits right now, you know, Ed and I have thrown back and forth some different ideas of just some simple information delivery, less interactive, but talking about the 4-star program and stuff like that. But if, you know, if we get some good input back from folks, we'll be able to kind of cater to what everybody needs, be it what everybody needs. Yeah. And we'll be able to really put together something a little bit more focused, and we can continue to have this discussion. Like, I really enjoy this. Like, I think I've met most everybody on one-to-one basis at some point, running around with different communities, but being able to see everybody together at once, and then just, you know, there's this background feeling that you guys all know each other, but I know that you do not. But it's a great community. So if we're able to facilitate and foster some conversation and a community between this, we'll keep doing it the best we can. So with that, I think that's the end of our discussion for today, but we'll be on here for any question or discussion you guys want to have.